All right, welcome back, everyone. Again, I guess I should probably say my name. It's Luke Boothman, and this is Apex Wilderness Adventures, and we're covering intermediate Apex concerns. So, once you've understood the basics of how to write Apex, and you have some experience implementing some projects and some code through some, different trainings like Trailhead or different tutorials that are offered up in the community, then you're kind of ready to go on to the next level. So what we're looking at today is we're going to continue refactoring Adventure Park Trigger. Last time we were mostly just doing some really basic code cleanup, formatting, removing unnecessary comments, and fixing, some of the most obvious stuff. So let's go ahead and continue on, and we'll begin to continue to explore the Adventure Park Trigger Handler and probably dig into our first method. We'll see. So if we remember, based on the previous videos, the Adventure Park Trigger has two dependencies, both the Trigger Handler and the Service Appoint Handler. So let's go ahead and look at, let's go into the Adventure Park Trigger Handler first. So we're going to see, let's go ahead and take a look. So we're going to see here this on before update, on before insert, on after insert, and on after update. So this might be a personal preference, but for me, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to move some things around to my liking. And this is, another one of those things where it's really based on your team and what you guys decide you like. Consistency is helpful when you're reading code, and the more consistent your code is, especially when you're working in a group, then the more likely you're going to understand what's going on without having to dig too deep. And this is a simple example, but other examples are going to be even more powerful. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to take this on after insert and I'm going to move it to the top. Actually, I'm going to move it to the second to the top. I'm going to move the before insert above it, and I'm going to move the before update underneath there. And then so in this way, the code reads, before insert, before update, and after update. That's kind of the order in which things would happen. So I think it makes sense to order it in that way. And then let's go ahead and look at where get price books is being called. So it's being called from before insert. So I'm going to move this helper to where it's first declared. And there we go. So that's pretty easy to do. And we'll go ahead and commit that. We're just going to move this code around. So reorganize the methods for readability. Good. And then the other thing we're going to do, which is also pretty minor, but it's going to be nice, is that you'll notice that these are not capitalized, which is our convention, and this method is. So we're going to go ahead and refactor that. So the shortcut I use is going to be, Shift F6. And you can also go into the refactoring tab and rename. So you can see Shift F6. And that will change it wherever it is called. So it's very nice. We've changed it both in the trigger and in the handler itself. Okay. So we'll say, there we go. Rename method for consistency. Easy peasy. Okay, so from this perspective, we're kind of ready to dive in a little bit to our code. And we're going to first look at our on before insert. So on before insert is going to take a list of parks, which is obviously common. And it looks like here we're looking for whether or not they have a price book. And if we remember from a previous video, we saw a test that set the price book. So we can imagine that this is the code that's accomplishing it. So if the park is null, then we're going to add it to a list, and then we're going to pass it in to get price books. So there's a couple small improvements we can make to this code that'll improve naming is a big deal. The better our names are and our attention to detail, then the stronger we're leaving ourselves context for what the code is doing for now and for the future. So these need PB. It's not the greatest name because these are parks, and it's pretty easy to tell that that's what these are here. But we could do a little bit better, and we can say parks that need price books. You could say PB, but these acronyms, we're not working on embedded machines, so we don't have to save that much memory typically. And it's a little bit nicer just to read this, right? We see that these are parks that need price books. Great. The next thing is the variable name. I'm not a big fan of just the single letters. If it's an index or it's a loop variable, maybe that's okay. But in my mind, I would much rather say that this is a new park. And I'm going to follow that convention in pretty much every trigger I ever write, is that if it's a new park, it's going to be a new park, or a new account, new opportunity, new contact. If it's an old one, it's going to be an old park, old opportunity, old contact. So it just reads a little bit nicer. And the last thing we can do is another thing that it's kind of minor here, but it can help us later in the future, is that, if there's no parks that need price books, then we don't want to call this code. So let's just go ahead and wrap this in an if statement. So if it's not empty, then we're going to call our get price books. And you can see that the IDE is complaining about price books not being a word, so I don't mind just going in and cleaning those up. Save that. And because we made a few changes now, let's go ahead and rerun our tests. We wouldn't expect anything to break, but we'll do it anyway. So improve variable names and check for empty list before calling helper. Okay. And sure enough, all of our tests pass, which we would expect. That's good. So now let's go ahead and look at what get price books is doing. And this is one of those cases where there's code that shouldn't be in our trigger handler. This get price books should live in the helper because it is a helper. And again, in this case, it's not maybe the end of the world to have this seepage of our separation of concerns. But if we're being disciplined in how we write code, this code should actually exist in the helper. So let's go ahead and move it to the helper. The first thing we're going to do is we need to make it public. Public static void's fine. And then we can take this out, move it to the top of our helper. Add venture park trigger helper. And we'll fix the area that broke below. All right. Now, again, we made a change that's not big, but we did move things around a little bit. So we're going to rerun our tests. And we can also see one more improvement that we can make real quick, which is in the previous state, we did have to have this create price books as a public method, and it had to be called from the helper. But now we're in the helper class, so we don't need that. And we can double check. This is the only place it's being called. So we can make this private. We'll do that. We'll rerun our tests. So in this change, we're really improving our separation of concerns by upholding consistent design. And again, it's the simplicity of these changes is so unbelievably obvious. But I'll tell you, when it comes to the really nasty code that we're going to see a little bit later on, these are the kinds of understandings that are going to get us out of those situations. When the code gets really unmanageable, it's a lot of small decisions and little improvements that chip away and chip away to the point that you can figure out, what's happening, why it's happening, and how to do it better. So don't disregard these just changes, these refactorings, just because they're simple. That's what we want. We want simple refactoring changes because they lead to profound changes later on. All right, good. So our test passed. Awesome. All right. So let's go ahead and look at this get price books real quick. It's called get price books. I think that's a bad name. It doesn't really make sense, right? What we're trying to do really is create price books because we've said that this price book doesn't exist. But if we call get price books, I would assume based on that name that it would be a SQL query. Or maybe we're fetching data from a third-party API, or we're doing something to get data, right? Get and set have very different meanings. So this isn't a great name. So let's go ahead and rename this to set price books. And then let's go ahead and look at this method here. So need PB, again, not a great name. So we can just call this new parks. Because we know they need price books, we don't need to reiterate that. You can if you want to, and if it makes more sense to you. But from my perspective, I know that we're setting price books because the method's called set price books. So all I really need to know is that these are new parks. And that's it's going to be okay. However, now that I say that, if we remember, we have this method called from both the insert context and the update context. They're still new parks though. From the trigger perspective, we have new and old. So, we could just maybe just call these parks to avoid any confusion. They're new from the trigger old, trigger new perspective, but they're not new from an insert perspective. So let's just call them parks, and it's a little bit more clear probably. Alrighty. So the next thing we're doing here is that we're going to create the price book. And so let's see what this does. So this is going to return a map of ID by price book. And we're going to use that map to set the price book for each one. And we can see that here we're actually creating the price book itself, right? So we create the price book first, we insert those, we return that map so that then we can set these up in the before context. In the before insert, before update, that way we don't have to have an additional update or insert statement. So that makes sense to me. Let's rename our map. Maps should have a convention. We use them so often. The better your names of your maps are, the better your code's going to be. It's that simple. So in this case, I like the convention I follow. There's a bunch of different ones out there, and really it's just up to you and your team to decide what makes the most sense. But to me, I say the value by key. So in this case, we're going to have price book by part ID. And if there was a list in here, we might use plural or we might use the word list, and so on, right? So this is very descriptive. This is a price book, one price book by park ID, not price books, because although maps are plural, when we look at a singular key, we have a singular value. So that's how I came to my convention, is that if it was a list of price books or a set, I would say price book list by park ID, or maybe price books by park ID. But in this case, we have a singular price book related to a singular ID. All right, very good. Now let's look at our method. So create PB. I mean, maybe in this context it's okay, but I'd still just rather spell it out. So create price book. And actually, we're creating more than one price book. So let's create, we could potentially be creating more than one price book because we could be creating, we could be bulk inserting parks, in which case we would be bulk creating price books. So we create price books from parks. All right. And that way, if we see it outside this context or we need to reuse it at some point, it would be clear that we need to pass in the parks. All right, that's looking good. And again, I would rather call this a park and not a P, so we'll rename that. Here, we're checking to see if there is a value in our map. Makes sense. And we're getting that, and we're setting the ID. That's fine. We could also do this once, so we don't have to have two get operations. So we could actually go price book equals dot get park ID. And that's nice just because now we only have to unbox it once instead of unboxing it more than once. Again, here may not matter so much, but in other contexts and in other code, this small little change can really help you out. So let's go ahead and save that, and we'll go ahead and rerun our test just to make sure something weird didn't happen. Very good, no problem. All right, let's go ahead and look now at our method. So this is the last step here. Remove some of the white space we don't need. Here's our price book map. And again, this is the same one as before, so we can rename it the same thing for consistency. So price book by park ID. We have a price book list. Let's just call these new price books, or we could call this price books to insert. That way it's distinctive from the new and old from the trigger context. So these are price books we want to insert. And do we really need a separate list for this? We really don't. This is a pointless variable because what we can do is just get our values, right? And this is another thing that's very simple. We're just reusing an existing variable instead of creating a duplicate one. But this is another one that really does matter when you get into the later stages or more complex code. When you can reduce some of the complexity by removing unnecessary values, it will go a long way. Let's go ahead and run this test again because that's a little bit more of a significant change. Make sure it's all good. Good. And then the last thing we're going to do here, let's rename our park to a park, give it a proper name. Let's rename our price book to a price book. And here, because we're really, there's really no reason to create this variable and set those. This is a convention I would follow a lot of the times when I'm creating a new record, is I'll just put them inside the constructor. And I think it reads a little nicer. A little bit cleaner, a little bit more concise. And there we go. The goal is to simplify. When we're cleaning our Apex, we're just knocking away little bits of dirt. we're fixing the conventions a little. We're making just a little baby step better. And when you add those hundreds and hundreds of small improvements, you get code that's clean and it's a lot easier to read, understand, maintain, and test. And now we have more consistent design. So now we're setting price books. That's good. We're creating price books from parks, and then we're updating the price book with the newly created price book ID. Great. That looks really good. So let's go ahead and save that, and we'll run this again just to make sure we're good. All right, made a lot of changes here. So let's go ahead and get this back. So we're basically just simplify um, and conventionalize. Okay. And then the last thing we want to do is that because this method is called from two places on before insert and before update, let's go ahead and look at the update context and make similar changes. So again, these are need PB. We'll go ahead and take our name. Oh man, I do that every time. Copy, paste. Okay, so we're checking if it's null. Let's add a couple spaces between our conditions. And let's wrap this in an if. Rerun our tests. All right. Then we'll make similar changes in the before date method. Great. So this is pretty good now. We now have a more consistent design. You know, we've removed code that shouldn't have been in the handler and should be in the helper, and we put it in the helper. We've renamed these things, we've simplified them, and we know what's going on. So we know now that there's probably a test in here that is checking if there's a price book. So here we see that when a park is created, one of the things that gets created is a price book. So we're checking to see if the price book was created. And we're doing a few other things. We haven't seen where these come into play yet, but good, right? If we wanted to, and what we'll do later is we'll make our tests even better because we know how this code's supposed to work. It's very straightforward. We create a price book with the name of the park, we set the price book to active, and then we take that price book and we put it on the park. So we can unit test this well, and we can cover this with very strong clarity. So I think that's good for now. And we're going to go ahead and move on to continue looking through our handler in the next video. So thanks a lot, and have a good day. I'll talk to you soon.